Thank you for joining me for another quick hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. I'm known as the mental MacGyver. My doctorate is in organizational business psychology with a concentration in sport and performance. And I provide luxury level high performance support and coaching to executives, founders, celebrities, and athletes. With me today, I have Michael Davis. He's the founder of Speaking CPR, where he helps business leaders and speakers improve their presentations and speeches. I have Dr. Bob Choate. He has 8 years military experience, worked with the LAPD, was a stage hypnotist, and is now an executive performance coach and going back to school for a third PhD, this time in physics. I have Kaitlyn Niechwiadowicz. She's a senior manager of talent at Alcogen, where she leads their global learning and talent management initiatives. She is passionate about helping individuals make an impact and exceed their potential. The question I have for you: what is common sense and how did you learn it? Michael, kick us off.
I love this question because I can't truly define it. Now, when you brought it up, I thought, how do I define common sense? Because we all have different lens on the world. I do know what my perspective of common sense was learned by exhibiting a lot of lack of common sense. I think it comes to doing things that I know are either morally or ethically or just common sense, not the right thing to do. Don't walk in front of the car that's speeding down the road at 35 miles an hour. Common sense. Don't touch the hot stove. I think those physical threats are obvious common sense. I think when we get more into the moral and ethical realm, common sense isn't so clear.
When you hear the word common sense, I agree with Michael there in that it's subjective. But when I think about common sense, I also think it depends on your environment. But I also think your natural strengths and interests also play into what your common sense is, because you're more tuned in to the things that you're interested in, or you might be more tuned into the things that come naturally to you. So some of that common sense you might have in one area feels obvious because you like it. So you're tuned in, you're listening, it's easy to do, versus for someone where it might not come as naturally or they're not interested, it's not common knowledge to them because they haven't focused on it or thought about it. So.
Yes, I agree with both Michael and Kaitlyn on this. I remember being asked this question years ago, and people would say, don't these people have common sense? And I posed a question to them. And the question was, imagine yourself, you're in the Amazon jungle. And there's these tribes that know the Amazon jungle. They have their common sense for that jungle. You don't. You take somebody from their environment and you bring it in to your environment. You have your common sense for your environment, and they have their common sense for their environment. We cannot just randomly say, don't you have common sense? Because it's different for each one of us.
Right. Something Kaitlyn said, I want to go back to real quick. She said obvious. And that to me is such a great definition of common sense, is it's obvious. And that makes me think of my social psychology class, where when you read social psychology, you're like, oh yeah, of course, that makes total sense. But if you weren't ever told, you wouldn't know. Michael, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I appreciate your insight. To go back what all three of you have said, it made me think of, in my world of speaking, when I'm working with a speaker, common sense tells you, what does the speaker do? Speak. That's not necessarily true, though, because the most powerful part of an effective presentation,
Pause.
Silence.
The silence. Common sense would say, well, speakers speak, and that's no, it's when they make a key point, they ask a question, or even say something funny, they then have to be quiet to let that point sink into the audience. That's not common sense unless you're deep into this topic. So what you said, Kaitlyn, is true. It is experiential and it is situational.
The other piece that comes to mind for me as well when I hear common sense is I also think of intuition and what that means for us as individuals. And I think as we grow up, we learn to start to ignore our intuition. So I've read some books where they say, no, you should be paying closer attention to what your body is telling you. When you get that gut feeling, it's usually right. And so I think common sense, you could also think about it as intuition. And maybe when we think about if the topic moves to building your common sense, or how do you get more common sense, maybe it's how do you listen to your intuition? How do you listen to yourself more? Because a lot of that's going to come out in whatever you decide to do if you really listen to that gut feeling.
Yeah. The thing about common sense and the way I've looked at it is context. I tell people to build up different mental models for different areas of context. And that way you will have more sense, maybe not common, because I don't think people really understand that, but have more effective mental models. So when you're dealing with something, you will have the intuitive sense of being able to deal with it, make better decisions and so forth, than just simply relying on something you really don't know much about or really understand.
Do you think when someone says they don't have any common sense, do they mean they aren't capable of taking the information that's being given to them and deducing or coming up with the right answer from that? Is that what that means? Or does it mean I didn't learn from doing something stupid?
I've been on a kick the last couple of years, actually, on the concept of the curse of knowledge. We all know our world and our experience so well that we think everybody else knows it, and we forget what it's like not to know it. I think that's where the term common sense blinds us. It's like, well, Kaitlyn, why wouldn't you know that? I do. Well, okay, it's common sense to me, but maybe my experience has been in that arena, whereas you could say the same to me about something you know well and I've never experienced. We're all caught in this curse of knowledge loop, and we forget that most of the world doesn't have any idea what we're talking about.
To use a baseball analogy, someone who's a really, really good natural pitcher cannot teach pitching. They don't know what they're doing. They just do it. It just works for them. And I think that that's the same kind of thing with common sense, is that, to your point, Michael, experience makes you, I'm the measure. I know this, so everybody should know this. Well, if they didn't live your life, how would they possibly know it?
The comment I'll make to what you said, Robyn, there to really hit home is we take for granted our experiences and the lens in which we see life and the way we live life, right? And that is where we get this idea of common sense. So my answer, I don't know if it's a cop-out, is it's subjective. Because one person might say, well, that's common sense because they saw someone do something silly. They put their hand on the stove and they burn themselves, and then they watch them do it again. Well, that's common sense, right? But when someone else says it, they might mean something totally different from our, kind of circles back the whole conversation we've had. And the term common sense is subjective. So the way in which people use it is also going to be different. So
I agree there. A lot of my fellow baby boomers, they get caught up in disparaging the younger generations. And I tell them that they don't know what you know, yet you don't know what they know. You haven't walked in their shoes. You don't know their environment and their life and everything else in terms of what they're dealing with. And I have a lot of friends that on the other end. I have a lot of friends that are Zoomers, so Gen Zs. And I'm learning from them as much as they're learning from me. I'm learning their world, their environment, and how they see things. In order for me to do that, and I agree, especially what Michael said on the curse of knowledge, I have to go back down to base zero in my learning. I have to tell myself, you're learning something new. You may think you know, but you don't really know. Learn from these younger people. So I constantly do that, and I constantly challenge myself in terms of that way.
You make a really good point. I can definitely tell you, if I went back and talked to my 25-year-old self, I'd be like, come on, it's common sense. Why do you not know this? But I've learned so much in that span that how can I judge her as someone who only had 25 years experience on the earth to where I am now? So thank you so much for having this conversation with me about common sense. That is our 10 minutes, so I'm going to cut us off there. I look forward to speaking to each of you again very soon.